Ga Min is a nerd who likes to study hard because his goal is to get to a prestigious university. His only problem is that no matter how hard he tries, he is very bad. Even though he studies to the point of exhaustion, he has the worst grades. That's why he changed to the technical school Yuseong, because here the students have special passes to the university. But that school was not like the others. Here were the worst of the worst, the most rebellious and problematic students in the whole city. But even so, Ga Min was still one of the worst in the school. But he was not one of those people who gave up easily, so he looked for a classmate who also wanted to study to form a study group. But when he went to ask someone, he was attacked by another student. Apparently in this school there was a ranking of strength. The weakest students had to fight against the strongest to move up a level. This was the hierarchy of the school. The strongest dominated and the weak were subdued. Later a new teacher arrives, Miss Lee, who happened to be the private teacher of Ga Min a couple of years ago. She tries to get along with her new students, but none of them seem to respect her. In fact, one of them gets up to hit another student who looked at him ugly, but after defeating him, the bully orders his classmates to attend the class, and automatically they all return to their places. At the end of the class, the teacher notices that in this school all the students smoke, and the teachers, instead of prohibiting it, had put special garbage cans for them so that they can do it freely. Later, Miss Lee meets Ga Min. He tells her to go to another school because here they don't seem to respect the new teachers, but she answers that she shouldn't worry because it is too early to give up. Then we see that Ga Min had become obsessed with Hyun and followed him around the school to ask him to study together, but he wasn't interested in that alone. He would go to the library to be alone so he could get some sleep. Until one day he got tired and decided to study with him. He really wanted to study, but his brain just didn't seem to be designed for it. Hyun asks him why he wants to be a good student, to which Ga Min replies that he simply wants to be good. So he proposes to his new friend to form a study group. He flatly refuses because the king of that school will never allow it. It turns out that he was someone dominated the school. Hanwol was number 1 in the strength ranking, and he was also the son of a successful businessman. Yet Ga Min asks him to study together since Hyun was the second best student in the school, but he gets angry and tells him that he doesn't have the time. At the same time, Miss Lee asks the vice principal to remove the smoking barrels and prohibit the students from smoking inside the school, but he tells her that it is very difficult to do that, and if she wants to do it, she will have to pick up the barrels by herself. And while picking up the barrels, she sees one of her students being beaten up. She tries to ask the teachers for help, but they just ignore her. Thank goodness Ga Min arrives and tells her not to worry. He will take care of rescuing her fellow student. So she goes in with a fire extinguisher and manages to save Hyun. But instead of being grateful, he tells her that she only made things worse because now she will beat him more and go after him every day. That's why she can't study with him. He was thinking of coming back to continue being beaten. But then the bully arrived with a bat ready to finish him off. Luckily, Ga Min got in his way, and with a single kick he smashed the bat. Apparently, Ga Min did have talent, but talent for martial arts he had trained for years because his teacher told him that when the body is good, the mind is good too. After defeating the boy with a single blow, he asks Hyun to join his study group, but he again says no. When he returns home, we understand why. When he comes back home, we understand why he was a good student but didn't want to continue studying. His father was an alcoholic and demanded him to contribute money to the household. He wanted him to forget about school and concentrate on finding a job. Later, we found out that Ga Min wanted to form a study group for a long time, but because of his bad grades, everyone told him no, and he thought Hyun was like them. So the next day, Ga Min had given up. But Hyun gives him his notebook, and that makes Ga Min very happy, and he wants to thank him. But suddenly the bully attacks him and tells him that it's time for revenge. Also, to motivate him, he burns the notebook. At the same time, the school had an inspection, and the vice principal had done everything to make it look like a normal school. But suddenly, a loud noise scared them. It was the fight of Ga Min and the bully. Our protagonist was very strong. So strong that he made the bully look like a rookie. Also, as he had burned his friend's notes, he was furious and asks him to apologize to him, but the bully refuses to do it. So Ga Min, with a flying kick, sends him to sleep. The whole class was astonished because he had defeated one of the strongest students without much trouble. Then Gamin apologized to his friend for burning his notebook. He replied that it doesn't matter, and seeing that he cares so much about studying, he decided to join his study group. Then comes the teacher and the inspector, who wanted to expel him because he thought that Gamin is the aggressor. But he says that he only defended himself, but nobody seems to believe him. So Miss Lee proposes to punish him in another way. He tells them that he is starting the first study group of the school. The vice principal says that it is impossible, but the inspector agrees. If he can gather 5 members, he will let him stay. The next day, the vice principal tells them that they only have 2 weeks to get the 3 missing members. Otherwise, not only will Gamin be expelled, but the teacher will also be fired. Gamin is very optimistic and tells him that they will get 3 members in a very short time. But in that school, no one seemed to be really interested in studying, so hours passed until finally someone came. But it was just another bully who had heard the rumors of their fight and wanted to check how strong he was. But Gamin did not make much effort and managed to defeat him without realizing it. His companions, on the other hand, were left with their mouths open and thought he was a very sadistic warrior who did not stop until he had finished and humiliated his rival. So the days went by until Gamin decided to change his strategy and wanted to go out to look for members for the group. But since his classmates had spread a rumor and the whole school was afraid of him, no one wanted to be near him. So he decided to look for another way to get new members. But then they saw a boy who did not run away from them. He was Gunyob and had been in a school in the United States. So Gamin invited him to his study group, but he replied that he was not interested. The next day, Hyun tells him that maybe they should give up and suggests Gamin to play sports to earn a scholarship to attend college, but he replies that he prefers to study. Then Miss Lee arrives, and when she sees them discouraged, she takes them shopping. Gamin buys the best to study, but Hyun tells her that he studies with a simple pen. At the end, the teacher asks them not to give up. Later, Miss Lee had intruders in her house. It was the bully of her class. She tries to keep calm, but he answers her that he will leave when she makes it clear that she should quit school, but Miss Lee had no intention of doing. That's just as well. A mysterious hero arrives to save her and beats all the bullies before they hurt her. It turns out it was Gunyob when they arrive at the parking lot. There were many bullies. The teacher tries to calm them down, but one of them hits her. That's why the boy must defend her and faces them all by himself. Gunyob was a very good fighter, and it looked like he could beat them, but the bullies were too many, and in the end they managed to knock him down. Luckily, at that moment, Gamin arrived, who had gone to pick up the book he had forgotten in his teacher's bag. But with him came many more bullies. They all surrounded him and thought they could beat him because he didn't look strong. But Gamin was very powerful and managed to defeat them all very easily. After the fight ended, Gunyob wanted to finish off the bully, but Gamin stopped him and told him not to cross the line. The bully took advantage of that and managed to run away. Later, one of the bullies returns to Miss Lee's house, and it turns out that he was her student. He begs her not to report him, and also tells her that they did it because Han Wul had threatened them. That's why the next day she decides to find out more about the king of the school and discovers why everyone was so afraid of him. His father was not only a successful businessman, but also the leader of a dangerous mafia, and that's why no one could touch his son. But she decides to confront him and asks him why he forces the students to commit crimes in his name. He answers that he doesn't force anyone. They do it because they owe him money, and it's a form of payment. The teacher asks him to stop, or else she will have to stop him. He tells her that will be fun and waits to see how far he can go. Meanwhile, Gamin had received a request for his study group, so he quickly goes to see who it is. But when he enters the classroom, it turns out that the school was co-ed, and that class was all girls. Now we meet Ji-woo, the twin sister of the bully that Gamin defeated. She, despite being very strong, was bullied by her classmates. But before she could be beaten anymore, Gamin arrived and asked her to join her study group. But before she could answer, the student council delegate arrived, who claimed to be Ji-woo's boyfriend, although she clearly didn't want to. But before he hits her, Gami throws a chewing gum at her and tells her that she can't touch a girl. But before the fight can start, A teacher arrives and tells her that she must leave. Later, Ji-woo's best friend arrives and she tells them why she never fights back, despite the fact that she is actually very strong. It turns out that the deputy had recorded a video of Ji-woo's twin brother robbing an ATM and threatened him to do what he asked him to do, otherwise he would upload the video to the internet. And although she didn't like her brother very much, he agreed because he is the only family she has left. That's why she asks for their help to get rid of the video, so that Jin-woo won't have to be harassed anymore. Ga-min accepts, but Hyun warns her that it won't be easy because the student council is full of strong guys. But Ga-min didn't care and managed to infiltrate their den. When Ga-min heard that, he came out of his hiding place and started to beat the members of the student council. The delegate was the strongest, so he managed to fight him. But Ga-min wasn't really fighting. He just wanted to get the video back. When he finishes with them, out of nowhere, more members of the student council appear. Ga-min fights with all of them at the same time, but as there were many of them, he can't defeat them easily. That's why his friends get worried and want to make a fight in the hallway so that the student council comes out to stop them. But they are caught by Ji-woo, so they tell him everything. That's why she herself wants to go to recover the video. But before entering, Ga-min comes out with the whole computer, because that's where the video was, and she wants to destroy it once and for all. She asks Hyun to throw it from the roof, and when he was about to do it, the deputy comes and threatens him to give it to her before he hurts her. But this time he doesn't listen to her, and throws it before she gets close. Then Ji-woo comes and tells her that it's time to pay for everything she did to him. At the same time, Ga-min is punished for destroying school property, but the flash drive with the video had fallen, and when it seemed that Choi-hee was going to pick it up, the bully from the council arrives and takes it from her. She yells that she is a bitch, and when the bully turns around to hit her, this time the girl doesn't run away. On the contrary, she runs forward to protect her friend. That's how she manages to recover the flash drive when everything seemed to be over. The bully arrives. He had discovered that everything was a trap of the delegate, or that's what Han-woo told him. That's why he wants to take revenge and wanted to stab him. But the teacher, Lee, gets in his way, and before he loses consciousness, tells him not to worry because she is there to help him. We later learn that the wound was not that serious, and the teacher came out of the surgery okay. Ji-woo goes to apologize on behalf of his brother and tells him that he already turned him in to the police, plus he offers to pay all the medical expenses. But the teacher tells him not to worry, just asks him to join the study group so they will be even. She says she is fine, and now the study group has 4 members, and they just need to get one more. The next day, someone throws a stone. It turns out it was another student who wanted to measure Ga-min's strength. But he tells her that he is not interested and that he can keep his spot. But suddenly a redhead arrives who wanted to join the study group, and since Ga-min didn't want to fight, he tears up the application in her face. That's why he jumped from the 3rd floor and punched him in the face. Everyone was left with his mouth open, and here we meet Lee Jun, a redhead who was the opposite of Ga-min. He wanted to fight and be stronger. But no matter how hard he tried, he was always defeated. That's why he switched to the technical school, because here were the toughest and strongest guys in the city. When he arrived, he felt at home and soon began to fight, and for the first time he became stronger, but he could not pass the 17th place. So when he learned that Ga-min beat the first 3 very easily, he thought of joining his study group to train him and thus become stronger. But when Ga-min learned of this, he took him out of the group because the redhead did not want to study. He only wanted to fight to raise his rank. However, they needed one more member, so they decide to give him a test. If he passes it, he can join their study group. Lee Jun takes the test, but suddenly Mafioso arrives and asks him about the famous Ga-min. He tells him that he has a test to measure his strength. Lee Jun impersonates him and decides to follow him on the way. He remembers why he wanted to become stronger. Apparently, when he was a kid, he was very weak, and that's why everyone picked on him. Until one day, another very strong kid defended him. Since then, they became best friends. But one day, that friend was recruited by the Jeonbaek gang, and since he was weak, he couldn't follow him. So he promised to become strong to bring him back. When he arrives, the test was simple. He just had to beat 3 soldiers from the gang and take the car keys. If he wins, The vehicle is his, and he would earn his place as a reserve soldier. At the same time, Ga-min and the others had come back to see how Lee Jun was doing, but he was gone. Everyone thought he had given up, but Gun Jeob arrives and tells them that a recruiter took him away because he thought he was Ga-min. Meanwhile, in the test, the boy had not been able to beat any soldier. He was too weak for her less. The study group arrives to save him. They tell Lee Jun that he got good grades and is now part of their group. His friends go to fight against the other soldiers, but they were quite strong, although they were not stronger than Ga-min, who after defeating his rival helps his friends. When they finish, he faces the recruiter, but he was very strong, so his friends also decide to fight, although they were no match for the recruiter, or so they thought, because Ga-min uses the forbidden technique taught to him by his uncle. With it, he destroys the recruiter, but it turns out that there was someone else in that place, was the right hand of Han Wul, who tells Ga-min that he is very strong and that he could join his gang directly and occupy a high position. He replies that he is not interested. Then the police arrive. Hyun and Choi Hae had called them, so they managed to capture the gang members. But the detective was not happy, because students should not get into this kind of fights. He still thanks them. The next day, Ga-min and the others studied together, or at least they tried to, as now they were officially a group. Many others tried to harm them, but luckily, they had the support of the teacher Lee, who had recovered from her wounds. The next day, the students meet in Seoul, but on their way to the other school, they run into a couple of bullies who make fun of them for the way they dress, but they didn't know who they were messing with. Then the teacher arrived, but Ga-min was late, so the others decided to go ahead. The school they were going to was one of the best in the country, where only the best students could enter. That's why there were so many study groups, but only one had agreed to see them. When they arrived with them, the other group seemed to be very arrogant and conceited because they didn't even look at them because they were studying. Ga-min had come to the wrong school because she had a very similar man, and it was right next to the school she had to go to. It turns out that school was also full of bullies. They sent the worst students in Seoul here. At the other school, Jae-woo was fed up with their attitude, but one of the guys says it's not that they are arrogant and cocky, they are just afraid, because for a while now the school on the side has been threatening them, and since they didn't look like a study group but bullies, they were afraid of them too. Now we found out that the leader of that study group was being beaten by bullies. They demanded money in exchange for his safety, and as his mother did not want to give him any more, they started to beat him harder. But at that moment, Ga-min arrived at the school and killed them. When they saw a stranger, they jumped on him. But they did not know that he was the four-eyed monster of the technical school. After beating them up, his friends call him and tell him to go quickly to the school next door. But the leader of the bullies arrives and starts to fight with Ga-min. Although he looked strong, he was no match for him. After defeating them, they start with the study group activities. They share with them their strategies and other activities to improve their academic level. At the end, the boys apologize for looking arrogant and thank them for saving their leader. Besides, he apologizes to Ga-min because it turns out that they were schoolmates before, and when Ga-min wanted to join their study group, he told him no because he had the worst grades in the school. Ga-min tells him that everything is okay because now he found his own study group, and to say goodbye, the boy tells him that he admires his determination and that he is sure he can become #1 in his school. Ga-min gets so excited that he starts to cry. The next day, they had gotten their own study place, but it was very dirty. After hours of work, they managed to make it spotless, but out of nowhere, an arrogant boy arrives. He was the student with the best grades in the school. He tells them that no matter how much they get together to study, they will not become intelligent. Then the teacher Lee arrives and pretends to be a good boy to appear. That's why Ga-min wants to beat him, but not in a fight, but in the grades. Although it is a very difficult task because he was the second to last place in the school, and his classmates were not much better. They were all below the 150th place. The only one who was above was Hyeon, who was the second best average. When leaving the class, the boys wanted to go get something to eat, but Hyeon tells them no because he had something important to do. Apparently, his father wanted him to start working at the construction site. Although since he was little, his dream had always been to go to college and get good grades. but his mother abandoned his father because he was a violent alcoholic and left him alone. Due to all of this, the boy we always saw humiliating him continued his torment. But before reaching the school play, he runs into Choi Hae. She tells him that she admires him because he remains calm, even in difficult situations. He replies that, in reality, Ga Min is the hero she should admire, and that he is just a secondary character. However, she tells him that's not true, and that he shouldn't underestimate himself so much. Before he can respond, they come across the arrogant boy, who starts mocking him and says that someone as poor as him shouldn't be hanging out with pretty girls. Choi Hae tries to help, but the girls with the bully attack her. Seeing this, Hyun decides to protect someone for the first time. However, things don't go well, and he ends up getting beaten up. Fortunately, Ga Min arrives and tells him it's time to return the favor. With just a few punches, he takes down the bully. Seeing this, the others panic and start running away, but for some reason, Hyun wasn't happy. On the contrary, he felt embarrassed because he had lost in front of the girl he likes. Defeated, he returns home, only to be beaten by his father for not going to work as he had been ordered. We also learn that his father blames him for his mother leaving. Angry, Hyun storms out into the street, where Ga Min is waiting for him and invites him to stay over at his house. However, Hyun tells him not to worry and that he will be fine on his own. Ga Min tells him that's what friends are for, to help each other. But Hyun feels like he is the only one receiving help and doesn't like people pitying him. As he walks, he encounters the arrogant bully again, who tells him it's time to pay for what Ga Min did to him. Just before getting hit, someone calls Hyun, and the bully, with a mocking kindness, tells him to answer the call so he can enjoy beating him up afterward. However, when the bully tries to hit him, Hyun dodges all the punches. It turns out that Ga Min had called him and was giving him instructions on how to defend himself, but suddenly, the call gets cut off because Ga Min's phone battery died. Realizing this, he rushes downstairs to help him, thinking to himself that his friend needs a small victory to avoid giving up. Just winning once would be enough. When he arrives, he sees that his friend has managed to defeat the bully with his own strength. They then go to Ga Min's house, but since it was already late, his mother was waiting for him. She is furious and tells him that since he arrived 2 days late, she will transfer him to another school. Hyun thinks she's joking, but Ga Min tells him that when his mother says something, she means it. Before going to sleep, he asks why he wants to be a good student if his mother doesn't even pressure him to get good grades. Ga Min replies that it's his own choice. He wants to be like his father, who was a brilliant researcher. The next day, his mother goes to school to transfer him immediately. His classmates aren't too worried, believing that with his grades, the only school that would accept him would be a distant one. However, his mother is willing to sell her house if necessary to move him elsewhere. Seeing this, his friends do everything they can to make Ga Min's mother see that the school is actually a good place and reconsider her decision. But their efforts are in vain, and that's when Choi Hee blurts out that she can't take him away because she's pregnant. However, his mother doesn't believe her and simply walks away. Later, teacher Lee arrives, so they decide to try again. They take a car and go after them, but on the way they are ambushed by some thugs who had found out that Ga Min was leaving the school and wanted revenge on his friends. To continue the mission, Lee Jun stays behind to fight them while the teacher and the others go to convince Ga Min's mother. It turns out that Lee Jun had been trained by Ga Min, but he had only taught him one technique, so he decides to use it to defeat them all. However, he still needed a lot of practice, and it didn't go as expected. Meanwhile, the others arrive at Ga Min's mother's place, but she refuses to listen to them until teacher Lee arrives. She tells her that she is now her son's teacher and asks her not to transfer him to another school. The mother says she just wants to protect her son and doesn't want him in a violent environment. The teacher replies that they can change that and that the school will stop being so violent with Ga Min and his friends' help. But if she takes him away, all his efforts will have been in vain. Before she can answer, the second in command of the gang, John Baek, arrives with other thugs. They want to take teacher Lee because she was trying to report Han Wool, but before they can lay a finger on her, Ga Min's mother steps in to defend her. It turns out that's where his physical talent comes from. His mother was a national taekwondo champion. A fight breaks out, and since they are skilled fighters, they defeat the thugs without much trouble. However, the second in command has a BB gun, and Ga Min's mother is seriously injured while protecting teacher Lee. Because of everything that happened, Ga Min is furious. The next day, he wants to take down the person responsible for all of this. But before reaching him, he must defeat his 3 top fighters, the 3 best brawlers in the school. When the fight begins, they underestimate him, thinking one of them alone is enough. But Ga Min tells them he can take all 3 at once. However, since they are quite strong, Ga Min decides to use another forbidden technique that his uncle taught him, dirty play. That's how he manages to defeat them. Then he goes after Han Wul and lands a powerful punch on him, but Han Wul doesn't hold back and kicks him in return. Ga Min tells him that he is just one person and can't act so arrogantly. Seeing this, the whole school starts speculating that Ga Min is a monster even stronger than Han Wul because no one had ever dared to hit him before. Later, we learn why Miss Lee chose that school. It turns out that her own teacher used to teach there and had wanted to change the lives of those students. That was supposed to be her last mission before retiring. But when she tried to stop Han Wul, she lost her life. That's why Miss Lee wants to continue her mission, to change the school and finally defeat the villain once and for all. Then we see that Han Wul's top fighters weren't actually bad guys. The blonde one was very kind to his sick grandfather, who advises him to stop fighting and focus on studying so he can become a great man. However, he couldn't just walk away from fighting because he was paying for his grandfather's medical expenses with the money he earned from fights. Later, he runs into Ga Min. It turns out that his mother is in the same hospital. As he talks to the blonde fighter, he realizes that he is not a bad person. He is just doing what he has to do to survive. He also realizes that the blonde fighter genuinely wants to study and is doing his best to become that great man his grandfather would be proud of. So, Ga Min asks him to study together. But before he can answer, 2 mafiosos arrive. They are the trainers, and they have come to punish the blonde fighter for losing a fight. Ga Min tries to help him, but the blonde fighter tells him to stay out of it. Later, we see that he had left his phone behind, so Ga Min goes to give it to his grandfather. There, he discovers that the grandfather also loved studying. He believed that life ends when one stops learning. The grandfather tells him that if you learn something new every day, it means you are better than yesterday, and there is nothing more fun than that. Before Ga Min leaves, the grandfather asks him to teach his grandson how fun learning can be. The next day, a 40-year-old man had been stabbed, and the main suspect was the blonde fighter. That's why the police go to talk to Ga Min, as he was the last person to see him before the incident. He tells them that the blonde fighter left with 2 mobsters, and that he hasn't heard anything since, but he doesn't believe he is the killer. After school, Ga Min tells his friend that the blonde fighter doesn't seem like the kind of person who would do something like that. Because of this, Hyun starts investigating and discovers that this has happened before. There was a psychopath in the gang who stabbed people, and to avoid getting caught, they always blamed a student. This was their way of testing loyalty. Since the students were minors, they would only be sent to a juvenile detention center. Afterward, they could officially join the gang. It was like an initiation ritual, and in addition, they would get a respectable job at the company Jeonbaek. At night, their suspicions are confirmed when one of the blonde fighter's friends goes to Ga Min to ask for help. But before he can say more, the trainer punches him and tells Ga Min to stay out of it if he wants to keep living. However, Ga Min knocks him out with a single punch. The next day, he tells his friends everything, and they all agree to help him. Their plan is to infiltrate the gang and gather evidence for the police to prove the blonde fighter's innocence. That's why 3 of them take the IDs of the members they had defeated. Although the guards are a bit suspicious, they eventually let them in. But inside, the place is full of strong fighters. On that very day, they had gathered for a training session. Hyun suggests they abort the mission, but Ga Min says they won't get another opportunity like this. However, when they go upstairs to look for evidence, the elevator isn't working, so Han Wul and his men start coming down the stairs. The boys have to hide. Meanwhile, the blonde fighter was about to be promoted and receive a hefty bonus for taking the blame. With that money, he could cover his grandfather's medical expenses and go to the juvenile detention center without worries. At the same time, Ji Woo and Lee Jun are discovered. Before the whole gang finds out, they decide to split up. Lee Jun stays behind to fight the thug, while Ji Woo goes to find the evidence. When she reaches the office, she finds the knife. But before she can leave, one of the trainers arrives, one of the most dangerous ones. She stays silent, thinking she has avoided being caught. At the same time, the blonde fighter's friends were with his grandfather. They promised to come back if his grandson was busy. When they left, they felt bad for letting Ga Min and his friends do all the work, so they gathered their courage and decided to go help them. However, at the meeting, the detective had arrived, and the blonde fighter had decided to confess that he was the killer. Even though the detective knew he was just a scapegoat, without solid evidence, he couldn't do anything. Meanwhile, the study group was in serious trouble. The trainers had cornered Ji Woo. Although she tried to fight back, they were too strong. On top of that, the second-in-command had discovered Choi Hee's drone, making it seem like everything was about to go horribly wrong. But then we find out that the blonde fighter had decided to follow his grandfather's advice. He wanted to become a great man. That's why he had chosen to return and face the trainer. However, the trainer was incredibly strong. Luckily, his friends arrived just in time to help him, and the three of them fought together. But even then, the trainer was too powerful, and they couldn't defeat him. Just when things seemed hopeless, Ga Min appeared. The trainer mocked him for not looking strong at all, but Ga Min wasted no time in proving otherwise. However, the trainer went berserk, attacking relentlessly without taking any damage. That's when Ga Min had to resort to using another forbidden technique his uncle had taught him. With that, he finally managed to defeat the trainer with a single strike. Afterward, he told the blonde fighter to return to school and get his life back on track. But the blonde fighter hesitated, unsure if that was the right thing to do. Furious, Ji Woo yelled at him to stop making excuses and just accept the chance. Shortly after, Hyun and Choi Hee arrived, having decided to risk everything to save their friends. But by then, the fight was already over. The next day, everyone was recovering. Despite their injuries, they were all in high spirits. It was also the day of their exams, and they had studied hard to level up. However, when they compared answers, Ga Min's responses didn't match theirs, making him feel like all his effort had been in vain once again. Later, we learned that the detective had proposed an initiative to help young criminals, but the captain doubted anyone would show up. Fortunately, the blonde fighter was the first to arrive. Later, we see that Ga Min's mother had recovered and called teacher Lee, worried because her son hadn't come home. It turns out that every time Ga Min took an exam, he would lose control of his strength, which is why his mother feared he might accidentally hurt someone. At that moment, Ga Min was out with his friends, and when he used the strength testing machine, he punched it so hard that he completely destroyed it. His friends were frustrated because he had been acting strangely all day. However, they calmed down and reassured him, telling him not to worry about his grades. They compared him to water. When you put it over fire, nothing seems to happen at first, but eventually, it starts to boil. In other words, as long as he kept working hard, his efforts would eventually pay off. Meanwhile, the blonde fighter's grandfather had taken a turn for the worse. Upon hearing the news, the blonde fighter rushed to be with him in his final moments. However, a group of thugs intercepted him, trying to take him down. Fortunately, he managed to defeat them all and made it to the hospital, fearing he was already too late. But thanks to Ga Min and his friends, he had just enough time. They gave his grandfather a copy of the exam and told him he could take it. That ended up being his first and last exam because shortly after, he passed away. But at least the blonde fighter had the chance to say goodbye. A few days later, the exam results were posted. Everyone had improved their rankings. Hyun was now in first place, while Ga Min had climbed 10 spots, reaching 209th out of 220 students. This was a huge moment of joy for him, as he had always been among the last two. Because of this progress, teacher Lee managed to get the disciplinary committee's support and was determined to put a stop to Han Wool. However, he had already planned for this. Something similar had happened before with Miss Lee's former teacher. The reason he wanted to avoid disciplinary action was that his father had ordered him to graduate without any issues. That's why he decided to get rid of the teacher in the worst way imaginable. He stabbed her right in front of her son. To ensure total control over the school, he created an app ranking students by strength. The strongest were chosen to join the Johnbeck gang, something that was a dream come true for high school delinquents. But ever since Ga Min arrived and formed the study group, things had begun to change. Many students, especially the weaker ones, had started to focus more on their studies than on fighting. Later, Gun Yob warns the teacher not to insist on the student council meeting because before that happens, Han Wul will do something to silence her. She tells him that she is determined and will go to the last consequences. Meanwhile, the vice principal informs Han Wul's father about what happened. However, he tells him not to worry because he has already thought of a solution. He had recorded the entire confrontation from the previous night and was accusing the study group of theft and destruction of private property. But since they were minors, they couldn't be prosecuted, so he sent a couple of YouTubers to expose them on social media. Because of this, the vice principal tells the teacher that she must take care of them first, or accept a deal where she leaves Han Wul alone, and in return, he will leave the study group alone. She tells her students about it and reassures them, saying that she knows they are innocent and will do whatever is necessary to prove it. However, to keep everyone occupied, Han Wul announces that whoever rises in the rankings will instantly receive 1 million won. This causes all the students to start fighting. Even the weaker ones fight each other for a chance to earn some money. Even Hyun was considering it, but Ga Min tells him not to give up now, as they still have a lot to do. At that moment, Hyun receives a call from his father and runs off, followed by Ga Min. It turns out that Han Wul was threatening the study group, telling them not to try so hard because the school would never change. He claimed that he could offer the students something they couldn't, money and connections, which were worth more than just studying. Additionally, he had brought the student council to dismantle their club, and Ga Min couldn't do anything to defend it because he had promised Miss Lee that he wouldn't get into any more fights. Meanwhile, Hyun's father was arguing with his coworkers. They had heard the rumors and were telling his father that he had raised a thug. However, he defended his son, saying that he was not a thug. Then, he asked him to tell him the truth, but his son remained silent. So, he pleaded with him not to become a delinquent, even if life was tough. Hyun agreed and told him that from now on, he would listen to him. He would leave school and start working in construction. Later, we see Ji Woo and Choi Hae feeling very discouraged because of all the rumors that had begun to spread. Additionally, due to what had happened, Choi Hee's parents no longer wanted her to associate with the study group. The only one who seemed to be doing well was Lee Jun, who tried to cheer up the group. But before Ga Min could respond, Hyun walked out. Because of this, Ga Min was very sad, and his mother comforted him, telling him that the only reason she had let him stay at that school was because he truly seemed happy. That's why she didn't want him to give up so easily. Meanwhile, Miss Lee was also considering giving up, but Ga Min arrived at the school and began trying to organize his club. The teacher saw him and decided to help, and that's how both of them regained their hope. The next day, Ga Min goes to his friend and tells him he'll help him work so they can finish faster and get back to studying. They start working. Hyun does what he can, but Ga Min works like 10 men, thinking it'll speed things up. However, his friend gets annoyed and tells him to leave him alone already. Ga Min refuses, saying that's not going to happen because they're going to study together and get into the same university. This makes Hyun give in, and he decides to go back to school. Later, he asks his father for his blessing, telling him that he now understands how hard he works and how much it took to raise him alone. Because of that, he promises to study hard so that once he graduates, he can help him. Ga Min reassures him, saying that his son will be very successful and that soon he won't have to work anymore. Then they go see Choi Hee's parents to ask for their permission. Hyun tells them that he's the top student in school and that, thanks to the study group, everyone's grades have improved. He also makes it clear that they are definitely not bullies. He promises that if they let their daughter stay in the group, she'll be able to go to a university in Seoul. Her parents agree. Now it's Ji Woo's turn, but she doesn't want to come back because she doesn't think it's worth it. He begs her to keep studying together so they can go to the same university. Next is Lee Jun. He's training as always, but they convince him with just a simple message. Meanwhile, Ms. Lee submits her report for Han Wul's disciplinary hearing. The vice principal tells her to focus on the real bullies and leave an innocent kid alone, but she stands her ground, saying that if they're guilty, she'll make sure they're punished. However, both of them know the truth. Han Wul and his group are innocent, so she won't let them be falsely accused. The students want to help their teacher, and even the blonde guy joins them, warning them that Han Wul is extremely dangerous. There's a rumor that he killed the previous teacher because he sees the school as his kingdom and won't let anyone ruin it. So if they manage to get him expelled, they can take him down without even fighting him. That's why Ga Min and his friends promise to protect Ms. Li until the hearing. That night, the vice principal calls the teacher, clearly terrified. He tells her that if she keeps pushing forward, she'll end up exposing even the company's corruption. To avoid going down with them, he offers her information. The detective thinks it's a bad idea, but Ms. Li is determined. When she arrives at the classroom, the vice principal reveals that Han Wul's father funds the school, which is why no one can stand up to his son. Apparently, they've been grooming him to be a worthy successor. But after spilling everything, the vice principal suddenly bolts. It was all a trap. Han Wul had called his best fighters to take down Ms. Li. She tells him to stop, but he smirks and says it's too late for that. She has to pay for her mistakes. Luckily, the detective had given her a spy camera, so everything was recorded. Now they had enough evidence to arrest him. But Han Wul had already anticipated this. He had bribed the captain to betray the detective. Luckily, Ga Min and the others were still at school. It turns out they had been secretly watching Ms. Li the whole time and had come up with a backup plan in case things went south. When they arrive at the scene, Ga Min grabs Ms. Li while all his friends surround her to protect her. But on the way out, each one ends up facing off against an opponent, including Hyun, the weakest of them all, who steps up to fight the second strongest fighter. When they finally reach the exit, Lee Jun's old friend is there, waiting for them. Meanwhile, Ga Min stays behind to fight Han Wul. Both of them are incredibly strong, but Ga Min is furious and yells at him for ruining everyone's school life. He says school should be a place to study and have fun, not a place where they have to fight and live in constant fear. That's exactly why Han Wul was winning, because Ga Min fights terribly when he's angry. At the same time, the others were also struggling. Han Wul's subordinates were insanely strong, and it seemed like all hope was lost. But then, the group takes a deep breath, calms down, and the fight shifts in their favor. They're much stronger now than ever before. Lee Jun was badly injured, but only because he didn't want to hurt his old friend. However, when he realizes just how much his friend has been corrupted, he decides to put an end to it and defeats him easily. Ji Woo and the blonde guy team up and, by combining their attacks, take down their opponents. And as for Hyun, he had been training with Ga Min's mom, and now he could actually defend himself. With a bit of skill and a lot of luck, he manages to take down the second strongest fighter. Meanwhile, Ga Min still couldn't defeat Han Wul. Han Wul tells him that he knows he's not fighting at 100%, and because he underestimated him, Ms. Li will never be able to leave the school. Hearing this, Ga Min takes a deep breath, calms himself, and decides to use the forbidden technique his uncle taught him. But Han Wul withstands it. And not only that, he counters with a powerful attack of his own. Because of this, Ga Min has no choice but to use the most dangerous technique in his arsenal. With it, he takes Han Wul down in the blink of an eye. But just when he was about to go save Ms. Li, he realizes he's completely exhausted. Luckily, Choi He had already taken care of calling for reinforcements. She told the class rep that Ms. Li had taken a stab wound because of him, and now it was time to return the favor. Plus, the blonde guy's friends, and even some former rivals Ga Min had defeated in the past, showed up to help. Thanks to them, they were able to protect Ms. Li. The next day, the disciplinary committee meeting takes place. In the end, they decide to expel Han Wul. Ms. Li tells him to use this as a chance to turn his life around, but he just storms off without saying a word. Meanwhile, the police finally have solid evidence, so they arrest him. Before leaving, Han Wul tells Ga Min that he won and that now he has the power to change the school. The former vice principal is also arrested, and Ms. Li declares that from now on, smoking is officially banned in school. Sometime later, things start to change. Han Wul's father completely disowns him. The disciplinary committee finally starts doing its job properly, and the fight app that had spread through the school is completely shut down. We then see that Ms. Li has finally fulfilled her former teacher's last wish. She has successfully reformed the technical school. A few days later, everyone shares their dreams for the future. But Ga Min simply says that his only dream is to become a university student, though he still doesn't know what major to choose. Even so, he wants to do it because dreams don't have to be set in stone. They can change over time. For now, he just wants to get good grades and get into a great university. And that's how this story comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. Keep studying hard, and I'll see you in the next story.